Every year, a lot of mistakes are made with people's medical school applications and the dental school ones as well that have varying degree of impact. Some can be quite costly. But here we're going to look at more of the overarching themes and errors in judgment that people make that hinder them or just make them go wrong with their medical and dental school applications. Now, before we dive in, just to say the first 2 points I'm going to mention might sound like they actually contradict themselves, but actually they are both symptoms of a bigger problem, which is people trying to have the shortcut mentality or shortcut the application in some way. When I train people, the reason that we have the success that we do is because we elevate them to be the kind of person and grow into the kind of person that will make a great applicant and a great medical or dental student and then go on to be a fantastic doctor. We are making them a better person rather than trying to hack the process to speed it up or trick their way through it. So the first misconception that people make is that it's all about one particular area of the application, whether that be the UCAT or whether it's the personal statement or the interview or maybe even the work experience. There is not one particular thing that all of your application rests in the balance of. One of the very common things is that people think if I just get a really good UCAT score, then the rest is taken care of. And that is simply not the case. It is all about being good in all of the areas that we talked about previously, in all the areas that matter, because ultimately all of them matter. People who think that it's all about the UCAT and then go and do well in it, they will get to interview, but then we always see those people who get 4 interviews and not a single offer because they've ignored all the other elements. It's a bit like saying, to somebody, what's the most important organ? The heart, the lungs, the brain? Well, if you were without any of those, you wouldn't get very far. And it's the same with a medical or dental school application. They all need to be working in harmony to be functional. It's a similar thing with it's all about the interview. People think that when they have an interview lined up, all they need to do is just put a bit of work in a week before, cram, and they will get through it. And no, again, that's the same error. It's all about not just what you do on the day of the interview, but it's all the stuff that you've done in the year or 18 months prior to the interview, again, that have built you up into the kind of person that deserves a place. What we're trying to do is, instead of trying to convince the panel that we should get a place, we're trying to be the kind of person that is very hard for the panel to not give a place. You can see how that reverse in psychology makes a massive change in how we approach the entire application. And the final one within that point is work experience. Now, a lot of people obsess over work experience, how to get it, what kind of work experience, doing way too much in some cases, thinking that that's all that matters, where that means that time spent on that is neglecting all the other elements that we need to focus on. So the theme here for this point is balance. So the second myth or misconception is when people underestimate either the UCAT or the interview in particular. Now, this is what I mean where I'm sounding like I'm contradicting myself. The problem with some of these elements is that people overvalue them but equally underestimate them. And again, this is people trying to take shortcuts by thinking, well, I can just quickly bust out 2 weeks of revision for the UCAT and get a good score, or just cram a bit of preparation for the interview and perform well and get the place. And this is where people get found out. We still need to allow plenty of time to prepare well for the UCAT, and that usually is a couple of months of light preparation at the start and then cranking up the intensity towards the end, as we'll discuss later on when we come on to talk about the aptitude tests. And similarly, the interview is all about, like I say, not just cramming in the last minute, but becoming that kind of person over the year or 2 years of preparation that you're putting into your medical school application to become, like I say, the kind of person that should have a place. Equally, in the same way that we talked about work experience, we don't want to overdo any one element. So again, for this second point, the theme is also balance, but also fair attention to the things that warrant it. Another myth is around grades, particularly GCSEs, where people think that if they haven't got great GCSE grades, that precludes them from being able to apply to either dentistry or medicine. Now, there is an element of truth to this, but it is very nuanced, and we get plenty of people in our course all the time with not particularly great GCSEs. Now, of course, there are some universities that have a GCSE requirement, and if your child falls below those, then it is a complete waste of an application, and they are some of the universities that you won't be able to get into. But there are still plenty that, again, if we look at all the other elements that we're going to discuss of a good application, that we can make up up for these things and still apply to a dental or a medical course with not the best GCSEs. Now, one of the elements that is true for this myth is the requirement around GCSE English language and maths. They do typically have a minimum requirement for that pretty much across the board, which is usually a 6 in both English language and maths. Now, some will raise that to a 7 for some of the universities, usually just in one of them, but it is something to pay attention to and something that if we don't have that grade in those particular 2 subjects, that we should consider resitting to make sure that we meet that mark. Now, the final myth/misconception that I want to talk about is around people applying as graduates. Now, as undergraduates, sometimes people think if they don't get the mark and they want to go on and maybe do a biomedical sciences degree, that this is the best way for them to kind of not delay and just get a degree and then come back and study medicine later and apply as a graduate. Now, this is something that isn't necessarily a given, and sometimes I would say possibly a mistake, rather than people who maybe take a year out and then reapply again and try their chances for a second time. The reason is because once you go from an undergraduate applicant, which has for medicine around at the moment about a 16 to 17% chance of getting in, 15% at the moment of filming for dentistry. However, then when you go over to the grad side of the coin, you're going from those percentages to a 34 applicant to 1 place, so less than 3% chance of succeeding. So people think that it makes sense to go on and do a degree and come back and look at the medicine or dentistry thing later, but I'm telling you that you suddenly take those odds and make them much more difficult if you are going for that option. Now, of course, you can understand that people don't want to waste a year. People want to get something out of the time that they're waiting and want to get that degree, and that makes total sense. But from a pure, if your goal is to get in and become a doctor or a dentist, and that is all you want, then it is worth considering that it's maybe not a given to go straight into a degree when you could spend that time focusing on a second application. Another area that people get confused often is when they are considered a graduate applicant. Now, there are 4-year shortened courses for graduate applicants, but also sometimes the graduates apply to a 5-year course. And if they do that, they believe that they are not a graduate applicant. However, that misconception is completely wrong, because when you are applying to a 5-year course, you are still considered as a grad applicant. So let's look at an example. Let's say Southampton University, and I'm going to simplify these numbers so they're not accurately reflecting the current university places, but let's say that they have a 40-place 4-year course, so 40 places available for their graduate 4-year program, whereas they have 200 places for their 5-year program. Now, people think that if they're a graduate that they are applying against 200 people, but actually you can imagine that this is a bit unfair on the undergraduate students, the ones who are coming straight out of A-level, probably haven't had time to gain the experience and all of the accolades that a graduate has. So it's very unfair to have them competing against one another. So what the university will do is they will take a small subset, so that could be 10% of those places, and allocate that pool to the grads. So then people are competing for those 20 places. Now, this will depend on the numbers and how it varies, but it's not always a given that the 5-year course is easier or less easy to apply to than the 4-year cohort. So remember what I said. If you hold a degree, regardless of which one you're applying to, you are considered a graduate applicant. Unless you don't want to use your degree, but then you have to have sat your A-levels within a certain amount of time, which means essentially that you'll have to resit them, then you'll be classed as a mature applicant, and then that creates a whole nother different situation, which is a bit more complicated. Now, another thing to consider within all of this is the competition ratios. Let's say that in this example that I gave before, it's not 10% of the 200, but actually 20%. So they have 40 places on the 5-year course. They also have 40 places on the 4-year course. But let's say 200 people are applying to this. It's probably going to be a lot more than that. But let's say that's the number versus 300 people applying to this one. So again, in that scenario, the 5-year course will still be more competitive. So this is what I mean by it's very nuanced, and medical school selection that we're going to talk about later is a very big part of this, particularly for grads, but it's not just a given that people will say, oh, the 5-year course is easier to get into. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes that's not the case, and we have to be intelligent about where we're applying based on those numbers. Now, one part where the 4-year versus 5-year course currently does matter is that of funding. So if somebody holds a degree and then goes on to do a degree on the 5-year course, this is considered a second degree, and therefore they are not eligible for student finance for help with the fees, so they have to pay that out of their own pocket. However, if they're applying to the 4-year course, this is considered a continuation of studies, and therefore you are eligible for help from student finance. Now, this is all predicated on people being allowed based on their home country student finance policy. It gets quite complicated, so I've made a video that goes into it in depth on YouTube, which I can link to in the description below. Again, this applies to Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So if you are from outside of that, you're an international applicant and you pay international fees, which are much higher, usually ranging from about £15,000 to £50,000 a year. So this whole debate of 4-year versus 5-year becomes somewhat irrelevant to the international applicants, other than the fact that you have an extra year to pay if you go for the 5-year course. The final myth that I see a lot with graduate applicants is that if the degree that they had prior to applying is a non-science based or humanities based, that they are somehow ineligible to apply for graduate medicine. That's simply not the case. There are some universities that do require science-based qualifications for their 4-year program, but there are equally lots of programs that take humanities students, and there are a few extra hurdles to jump through for that, but it is still very much possible.